Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Echo Live. My name is Paulette, and I'm coming at you live from the Michigan Science Center's planetarium. I am so excited to be talking to all of you today, and just so our guests that haven't necessarily joined us before, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat feature. So that chat feature, whether it be on Zoom, YouTube, or Facebook, is how I'm going to be able to communicate with you throughout our program today. So I am the staff astronomer here at the Michigan Science Center, and we're going to be talking a little bit about dwarf planets. Now, one of the most common questions that I get from people is, what happened to Pluto? So you can see my little image behind me. This is a little cartoon that I got. We can see our solar system buddies, and then Pluto is way off in the corner looking a little bit sad. So what happened to Pluto? Well, Pluto is actually still there. And we're going to talk a little bit about what happened to Pluto. So Pluto is, of course, one of our largest dwarf planets, and we have a really great image of it right here. Pluto was actually discovered in 1930. It was the last planet for us to discover. Now, in 2006, 2004, we started to discover some of these objects beyond the orbit of Pluto. And with these objects, we were like, oh, now what? So we found these objects beyond the orbit of Pluto. What do we do with these? What do we call these objects? They were, some of them about the same size as Pluto, some of them a little bit smaller. One of them we actually thought was a little bit bigger, Eris. So in 2006, the International Astronomical Union, or IAU, came together and they discussed it. So the International Astronomical Union is who officially names all of the constellations we have up in the sky. They say what is official and what is not official. So in 2006, they decided to be a planet, it had to follow 4 criteria. To be a planet, something has to orbit around the sun. Okay, so Pluto orbits around the sun. So it could have it does have one of the things, one of the requirements. It can't be a satellite. So it can't be a moon. It can't be orbiting around another planet because, of course, that would make it a moon. But Pluto's not orbiting another planet. It's orbiting around the sun, and it's not a satellite. It has to maintain something called hydrostatic equilibrium. And that's just a really fancy word, a way of saying that it has to be kind of shaped like a ball. So when we talk about asteroids are sort of elongated, and they are elongated and they're sort of shaped like potatoes. So asteroids can't be planets, and so it has to be round or shaped like a ball. So it has to maintain hydrostatic equilibrium. Cool. Pluto has 3 of our 4 requirements. But the last thing that a planet needs to be able to do is it has to clear its orbit. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go on with our program today. But unfortunately, Pluto does not clear its orbit. So because it has 3 of the 4 requirements to be a planet, only has 3 of them, it actually was reclassified as a dwarf planet instead. So poor Pluto got demoted or reclassified as a dwarf planet. Now let's take a look at some of our other dwarf planets that we have as well. These are some of our dwarf planets that we have in what we call the Kuiper Belt. That's the orbit of Pluto and beyond. We have, of course, Pluto, our dwarf planet with the mostest. And then we have Eris. This is the one that we discovered, and we're like, what on earth do we call this? Then we have Makemake, Haumea, Sedna, and Quasar. We have a few other objects that are beyond the Kuiper Belt as well, and in the Kuiper Belt, but these are the ones that we've actually named. Now, when we take a look at Haumea, we're actually going to see that it looks kind of weird, doesn't it? Haumea is actually sort of egg-shaped, so it still maintains that hydrostatic equilibrium. It's just that it's shaped like a football instead of a basketball or something like that. So let's go ahead and switch on over to our virtual planetarium. We're going to be using a program today called NASA Eyes on the Solar System. This program is free and you can use and download at home. It also has a web version if you didn't want to download it, but this here is our solar system. And of course, we have our planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But there's a lot more happening in our solar system than just these planets that we see. There's also our dwarf planets and trans-Neptunian objects, so objects beyond the orbit of Neptune. Now, when we take a look at our dwarf planets that we have here, you might notice something a little bit weird. So for the most part, our solar system is all in the same plane. Our solar system is pretty much flat, like a disk. But when we take a look at our dwarf planets around it, what's something that we notice about some of those dwarf planets? So notice the planets in our solar system are basically flat, shaped like a disk, but what do we notice about our dwarf planets that might look a little funny or a little weird? What are the orbits doing around our solar system? What do the orbits of the dwarf planets do that the orbits of the planets don't? Taking a look at this, what do we notice? Evan from Texas has a really great question. How many dwarf planets have been discovered? And we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 large dwarf planets that we've named in the outer part of our solar system. And we have some planets in the inner part of our solar system, or dwarf planets in the inner part of our solar system as well. We're going to talk about that one in a little bit. So Justin has it exactly right. The orbits around the solar system, when we're talking about our dwarf planets here, are super wonky. They're not orbiting around in the same plane. They don't clear the path of their orbit. So that's one of the reasons why these are called dwarf planets instead of planets. Now let's go ahead and fly in to our favorite little dwarf planet right over here, Pluto. All right, so here we have Pluto, and you might have seen a lot of images of Pluto within the last couple of years. And that's actually because we sent a spacecraft to Pluto. So in 2006, when the International Astronomical Union were discussing whether or not Pluto is a planet, we launched the New Horizons spacecraft. 9.5 years later, that New Horizons spacecraft actually flew past Pluto and took some really awesome images of the surface. So when it took those really awesome images, we were able to see Pluto in more detail than we've ever seen it before. Pluto has some areas like this right here. This one is sometimes known as the heart on Pluto. If you're looking at it a different way, it does sort of look a little bit like a heart. And I think it looks a little more like the dog Pluto. I like to think that there's a Pluto on Pluto. But the heart on Pluto is right up over here. Now, most images you see it shaped and turned around a different direction. But remember, when we're out in space, it doesn't matter what direction is up. Basically, space doesn't have any certain particular direction to be facing. Evan asked if it's the Voyager spacecraft, and that's a really great question. The Voyager spacecrafts were actually launched. Voyager 1 and 2 were launched in the late 1970s, and the New Horizons spacecraft was launched in 2006. The New Horizons spacecraft was actually our fastest spacecraft ever. And like I said, it took 9.5 years to get to Pluto. So if we actually take a look at our New Horizons spacecraft, we're going to be able to see it right here. And we're also going to be able to see our New Horizons spacecraft and where it is out in space when we take a closer look at that. So let's go back over to our virtual planetarium and back into NASA Eyes. There we go. So there were a lot of things that we did not expect to see on Pluto. We were expecting Pluto to be dark and blue because it's cold in that part of the solar system. But what color is Pluto? When we take a look at it in this in our virtual planetarium right here, what color is Pluto? It's a very different color than I ever expected it to be. I thought it was going to be blue with lots of ice, but it's actually sort of a pinkish reddish color. Again, something scientists really didn't expect. We expected it to be like blue, like water ice, like the other outer planets. But there's actually, it's sort of a reddish pinkish color because things will actually precipitate down from the top, from the atmosphere, the very, very, very thin atmosphere, and precipitate down to the surface, which gives it sort of this reddish color, something we weren't really expecting. We were also expecting Pluto to kind of look like our moon. We were expecting it to have lots of craters on the surface, overall pretty flat. But it turns out that it's not. It actually has ice mountains and some really flat areas like this one right here. This one we weren't expecting because we were expecting more cratered areas. We were expecting it to get hit more often than it has. So we've learned a lot about Pluto because of that New Horizons spacecraft flying past it. Now, Pluto has a moon. It actually turns out that Pluto has several moons. It actually has 5 different moons. Now, if we zoom back out a little bit, we're going to talk again a little bit about our friend Eris down over here. Eris was discovered just beyond the orbit of Pluto. And when we discovered Eris, we thought that we discovered another planet. We thought that we discovered something that was larger than Pluto. Now that we have been able to take a slightly closer look at Eris, slightly closer, we've actually been able to discover that Eris is not larger than Pluto. It's just slightly smaller. So Eris is another rocky world in the outer part of our solar system that we call a dwarf planet. So, like I said, we've been able to discover things in the outer part of our solar system that we've had to reclassify as dwarf planets. I'm going to zoom out a little bit further and let's go ahead and take a look at where our New Horizons spacecraft actually is. So let's center ourselves on the sun. All right, so we're going to center ourselves on the sun. There we go. Woo! We are flying all over the place. I apologize. I don't usually use this program because flying around is a little bit weird, but it is the only one that has the data that we're looking for right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can find where the New Horizons spacecraft is. All right, let's see. New Horizons, that would be the outer planet, right? Because we're looking for the outer planet spacecraft. And there it is. Now, Evan from Texas, you mentioned Voyager. Voyager 1 and 2 is in the both are in the outer part of our solar system. You can see right here. But these guys didn't get a close look at Pluto. They actually missed it by a little bit. They got a really close look at Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune for us. But New Horizons, like I said, the fastest spacecraft ever. There we go. Let's go ahead and take a closer look. So the New Horizons spacecraft is going to continue flying to the outer part of our solar system. And at some point, it's actually going to get further out than Voyager 1 and 2 because this spacecraft was flying much, much faster. There's a lot of instruments on this spacecraft, particularly lots of cameras to get us a lot of interesting data. And what do you think this satellite dish is for right here? So we have all of our instruments around the outside. What do you think this satellite dish might be for? We've got some cameras. We have some different instruments that we have. What's the satellite for? What could that possibly be doing on the surface of New Horizons? This satellite dish is actually sending all of the information back to us on the Earth. So we still get information from the New Horizons spacecraft. It flew past Pluto in 2015, but we're still constantly getting data from it. We actually got a little bit of information from the New Horizons spacecraft about an asteroid that was in the Kuiper Belt that was kind of shaped like one of those little squeezy dolls. So if you squeeze the bottom, the eyes pop out. So we found out that asteroid was kind of shaped like one of those little squeezy dolls, which I think is kind of cool. All right. So I said that there's some dwarf planets in the outer part of our solar system, but it turns out that there's actually a dwarf planet in the inner part of our solar system too. So we talked about the planets in the inner part of our solar system. We have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Inner part of our solar system is going to be Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. What is between Mars and Jupiter? What do we have between Mars and Jupiter? Does anybody know what we call that space between those two planets? Between Mars and Jupiter, it has lots of really big, loose collections of rocks that are sort of shaped like potatoes. What do we have between Mars and Jupiter? What do we call that area of space? We call that area of space with the giant loosely collected rocks called asteroids. So we call this area of space between Mars and Jupiter the asteroid belt. Most of the asteroids that we have in our solar system actually live inside of that asteroid belt. The largest of them is an asteroid called Vesta. But there's also something really cool in the asteroid belt. It's not an asteroid. It's even larger than Vesta. Right here, we have another dwarf planet. And this one is called Ceres, or Ceres, depending on the pronunciation that you're using. So this one was actually discovered in 1801. And when they discovered Ceres, they were like, we discovered another planet, hooray! And then they decided, no, not big enough. So we're going to call it an asteroid. Well, when they were reclassifying dwarf planets versus planets, they reclassified Ceres as a dwarf planet as well, because it is orbiting around the sun, it's not a satellite, and it's maintaining hydrostatic equilibrium. So just a couple of years ago, we sent another spacecraft to this part of the solar system. We sent a spacecraft called the Dawn spacecraft. This spacecraft went to both Vesta, the largest asteroid in the asteroid belt, and it also went to Ceres. And it got all of its information and data back in 2015. And we were looking at this data and this information, and we were really, really confused. Because on the surface of Ceres, we were seeing something very, very strange. We were actually seeing something like this right here. Taking a look at that, what's weird about it? What's weird about this part of Ceres? Taking a look at the rest of it, it kind of looks like what we were expecting. Oh, there's some weird stuff here too. But the rest of it's pretty cratered, something we were expecting when we took a look at it. But there's some shiny stuff. Right here, we can see some shiny stuff on the surface. Super, super weird. Something we weren't expecting to see. And when we took some of our close-up images, we wondered, what on earth? Well, not on Earth. What in space could that be? What are these shiny things that we see on the surface? It doesn't make any sense. Well, it turns out that just a couple of days ago, they announced what those shiny things were. Has anybody been following the news? Does anyone know what those shiny things are on the surface of Ceres? What did we just discover a couple of days ago? And if you haven't been following the news, that's okay. It came out a couple of days ago, but I didn't catch it until yesterday. Justin has it exactly right. It's ice. We have ice on the surface of Ceres. Well, that's weird. How would we have ice on the surface of something so small? Well, it turns out that Ceres actually has an ocean underneath the surface. There's a saltwater ocean underneath in this dwarf planet in the asteroid belt. Those shiny things that we see are not actually liquid water. Are not actually ice, but salt deposits. So salt was coming up, the water was coming up out of the surface, and it was evaporating because Ceres doesn't have much of an atmosphere. So it was immediately evaporating. And what was left behind was salt deposits on the surface. And so that's going to be shinier than the rest of the surface. And this is something, like I said, we just discovered a couple of days ago. They announced this, August 11th. So 2 days ago, they announced this amazing discovery. Ceres may have once held life because it had some recent geological activity. So it has water and minerals, and it might have had a warm period at some point in its past. Anna asked a really fantastic question. How do we know that it's salt? And that's actually, they know that it's salt because they've actually been able to, with the Dawn spacecraft, get a really, really close look at this area of the surface. Like, so close of a look. Here, let me go ahead and actually share an image that I didn't put in my PowerPoint for some reason. Here we have that image. So they're looking at it in visible wavelengths, and they're also looking at it in infrared. And with that, they're actually able to see sort of the salty liquid and tell that it's salt underneath the surface, which I think is super, super cool. And that salt water that's underneath there, and like I said, the water evaporates almost immediately because it doesn't have much of an atmosphere. So, like I said, this is something we discovered just a couple of days ago, which I think is super cool. And we were able to, at one point, this might have been a place for life. Now, in our solar system, we've talked about a few different places that could have possibly had life. For example, Mars at some point could have had life. We don't know. We're still trying to do the research. We also have some different areas, like Europa is another place where it's possible, and Enceladus is another place where it's possible that we could have life. But this one is really, really close to us. We've actually already sent a spacecraft there. Now, we sent spacecraft to Mars, and they're doing a lot of research about whether or not it had life. But this being so close to us is really, really cool, and we'll be able to do a lot more research to try and figure out whether or not at some point this did have life, because the further away an object is, the harder it is to get a spacecraft there. So, our little dwarf planets are still some amazing things and doing some amazing things for us in our sort of scientific research that we're doing. So Pluto was totally unexpected with the findings that we came up with. Ceres has been totally unexpected with the findings that we've been coming up with. So we'll try and discover some of our other dwarf planets in the future and send spacecraft there as well, and just see what else we might be able to come up with. Our solar system is full of some very, very unexpected things. So that's pretty much it for our program today. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature and I'll try and answer any questions that you may have. This is also a great time to thank our sponsors. Today's program is brought to you by Ford and Denso. They have been supporting us all summer long since the shutdown. We've been able to bring you programming first daily, and now the programming is every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30 Eastern. So Anna is usually here on Tuesdays to talk to you guys about some fun science topics, and then I'm usually here on Thursdays to talk about some astronomy related topics. Because like I said, that is my favorite thing to talk about. If you are in the Detroit area, we also have some really cool Spark in the Park activities happening. And those Spark in the Park activities, you do have to register for those on our website, but they are super fun. Last week we did something on orienteering, and then this week on Saturday we're going to be talking about bugs. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you are in the Detroit area and you're looking for something to do and not staring at the screen, although we love seeing you stare at the screen every day when you tune in. And then, of course, the Michigan Science Center is also open. So come check us out and give us a visit. I've seen a couple of folks come in that have been watching since the beginning, and I'm glad to see you here. And I know some of you live far away, and that's okay too. I love seeing your names pop up every day. All right. So do we have any more questions? Let's see. Didn't see any more questions coming up. Evan from Texas. I'm not sure what the next program is, but I know Anna will have something really fun on Tuesday. And that's right. We need to be excited about Pluto because even though it's a dwarf planet, it's been reclassified and it's still there and it's still really cool. So poor little Pluto down here is still around. He's still part of the family, but he might just be a little bit smaller than the rest of his stepbrothers and sisters. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the program and you tune in Tuesdays and Thursdays